this is amazing, right? Because
it can't be the same.
I have to double check that. If anything, it's just an hour difference.
Really?
Maybe we have the fact checker figuring it out for us as we speak.
Time zone in Ukraine. Which part of, is it Kiev or? Is it?
No, they are also in a remote situation, right? So they belong to they are part of a company that we work with, and they are affiliated with this company.
GMT +2, so they 1 hour only.
Yeah, to Kiev. Yeah, 1 hour. I learned something new. Thank you, Goran.
Surprising.
Yeah, no,
it's like Finland, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but it's a big country, right? No, so they work from all over the place. They work from home. There's an office there.
They have an office as well.
There. Yeah, they do have an office they can go to, but they work from home most of the time. I mean, due to the pandemic, that's the kind of de facto model now for most people. Yeah. And as they were dialing in, are we starting, or should we just continue?
No, just continue. Yeah. We go back a bit to the, what happened this morning. I think, as we start that, we go back to that topic. We just keep speaking now, and then we jump back. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're working from home. Are everyone working from home, or are some coming into the office here in Sweden as well, or what's? Well,
actually, we don't have physical office in Sweden.
Really?
I used to rent space at Epicenter, but once the pandemic hit, it didn't really make any sense anymore right now. No. So to my wife's great disappointment, the living room has been remodeled into my small office, which is kind of a combination of an office and a man cave. To be quite honest with you, there are a few guitars and pianos and stuff that's staying around.
It almost feels sad for Epicenter and on all these kind of co-working centers now these days. They must be hitting hard.
But they kept it lively still, right? So there were a lot of newsletters going out that still organize things. So,
but WeWork went bankrupt here in Stockholm, right? Or at least they closed down that office.
I don't know. I mean, did you hear this? The podcast around the WeWork?
No.
Okay, you should check that out.
What was that?
It's called We Crashed.
Of course it is.
It's a story about the founder. It's quite interesting. It's a bit like Bad Blood, but a bit more recent.
So it was the execution was not the best, or?
Well, I don't want to get into it too much, right? You should check it out. But
it's an interesting story.
It is a very interesting story. It's a very interesting story. Yeah, one that tends to repeat itself in certain circles.
Yeah. But maybe once again circle back to. You basically this morning. How did it unfold for you? What happened?
Well, I woke up this morning as I always do. Are we live? Okay, yes. Great. As I always do, took my shower, made my coffee, sat down for some morning news, only to see the situation between Russia and Ukraine sort of unfold in real time. And we have team members working from Ukraine. We have team members of Russian background. We have team members of mixed Russian-Ukrainian background. So I said, okay, this is, I need to think about this, right? And how do we deal with this? And only moments later, I learned that our colleagues from our Ukraine have been dialing into our stand-ups as always.
And they're saying hello,
joining up and saying, how are you doing, man? What's happening? Said, well, I'm in a cab right now on my way to the bank. I'm going to see if I can get my cash out, right? Another person was like, well, I'm actually heading into the office for the first time in a long time because I don't feel as safe here, at close to the border.
So they're more safe in the office rather than in the home?
So basically people are just, to some extent it's like people they've been waiting to kind of understand how is this going to unfold, and once it unfolds, I suspect they've been thinking about what to do, and now they're putting those plans in action. That's how I felt about it anyway. And of course, our colleagues with Russian background, they feel like, I've been led to understand that some feel a bit of a guilt by association, right? And that's something you need to deal with a little bit, right? You need to make sure that here at the office, we are one family. It's about us and what we do here. Everybody's an individual. We need to support. We need to listen to people, and just help as much as we can.
And we shouldn't get into political statements here, but still, it's kind of. Did you get into if they support Putin or not, or?
No, I don't want to. I mean, in some of the pre-talk here we talked about, so we also have teams in the US, right? And we had the Trump elections, and now we have Putin. We try to stay clear of that as much as possible.
And I think it's a good policy, right?
Yeah, I mean,
is that how? I mean, if you have like a multi-country workforce as you do, and we still have to have people working with each other even when at war, so to speak. How do you manage that? What's the...
Oh, God, I wish I had the answer. But, I mean, for me, I have to kind of make this a bit about sort of how I try to do this. I'm not saying that I have the answer to these questions, right? But I have to go back to what feels genuinely like what I can contribute with. And I can listen, and I can try not to judge, try to leave my own biases at the door, and just figure out how can we support. And it may sound simple, but it's kind of the best answer I have now, right?
And to be human,
yeah,
to be authentic, to be caring,
exactly,
to have empathy.
Yeah, not too much though.
No, maybe not. But I was one question that was on my mind. How do you feel the team? Do they seek normality? Do they seek to have the call in and the normal stand up? Is that a good thing for them, or do they need to sort of start working on other things, or actually are they seeking? Let's use role here.
Yeah.
Or are they seeking other discussions this morning, or they're seeking normality, so to speak?
Well, it's always. There are two potential pitfalls I can fall into now. Right? One is generalizing, the other one is pretending that I know what goes through people's heads, right? But if I do that anyway,
let's do that anyway.
Let's do that anyway. I would not be surprised if the sort of morning stand in the routine provides some sense of normality or some sense of structure. I wouldn't be surprised.
So that's a good thing for like stability reasons.
Yeah,
I think for me it would be like the way I'm wired. I think having that thing that I can hang my day on would be helpful, right? Yeah. I can't speak for the individuals that we're working with.
So I rephrased the question. Good point from you. If I rephrase the question, are you planning to try to keep the light on, do the best of the situation, and then be Arundo and do what we are us. We get our stuff going. We have our goals, and we do it together.
Yeah. So yes, we're going. I mean, for us, it's. It is we're talking about a part of our. If we talk about the people that are directly affected by this, like physically directly affected by this, it's a small part of our workforce, right?
Yeah.
We will of course try to keep the lights on. The thing is that it's a fine balance to set between making sure we're keeping the lights on and be safe, but also make sure people are safe.
Be safe.
Safe. Exactly. That's the thing, right? So what we said is, check. If you want to join the check-ins, please do. There's a lot of stuff that we're going to do.
If you can't,
don't.
Exactly.
Just don't, right? And if you need help, just let us know.
So basically, we are here, and if you want stability and you want to join this, we are all for it, and we go. If you have other things that are more important right now, we support you 100% in what you need.
100%.
100%.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, again, running the danger of making promises that I can't keep up, right? But the other thing is that I do mean it technically when I say that if people need help, they will get the help they need, right? We're not gonna, if somebody can't show up for whatever, right? It's not like we're gonna leave them hanging, right? We're gonna make sure that there's continuity, if you know what I mean. That we're gonna be here when you feel safe again, when you're ready to go back to work. We're gonna be here.
Yeah, I think that's a good statement.
Yeah. So interesting. Go much longer
I don't know.
into this,
and how to. Yeah, and if I flip it from another way, maybe last question: how do you see what is unfolding here affecting us or you as a company and as a CEO in relation? Okay, you have part of your organization and operation here, but it has the whole macro perspective of things.
Yeah.
Have you seen any other things? Have you thought about any other angles that you need to analyze or consider?
Yeah, we've had plenty of conversations about that, and throughout the morning today as well in the management team. There are some macro trends which are fairly obvious that you can just watch in real time as they unfold. You see the oil prices increasing, you see the energy prices moving, you see how the stock market is evolving. Cybersecurity, I think, is going to be a topic that we need to be very aware of as we move into this. So these are things that we are trying to be as prepared for as we can.
Yeah.
But
are you already now saying sort of, if I used to, I'm so inspired by Spotify here that we talk about the data, the insights, the bets and the beliefs. Have you formed any new insights, bets and beliefs based on the macro view of what you have sort of seen unfolding the last month?
Well,
what you need to take into consideration for Arundo.
Insights, bets and beliefs. I'm just reinforcing my belief in people. That at the end of the day, regardless of whatever is going on in the world, whatever association you may not have to what's going on here, individuals want to do good. They want to to contribute, and my belief in that has only strengthened it than anything else. In terms of insights or bets, nothing revolutionary. It's this.
So nothing that sort of changes the game and what you're doing, so you need to tweak and pivot your direction.
I'm a very careful captain. I only steer my ship onto a new course, for better or worse. Once I have understood that course in some detail.
It's too early to say.
So for me, I think it's too early to say that we're going to kind of switch any directions at this point.
Yeah, makes sense.
I love what you said. Believe in the goodness of people, and they all have it, no matter what their nationality is. Right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's we all belong. You can the way you can define yourself in so many different ways, and the one that matters to us as a company is what we do as a company when we are doing our jobs, and the other ways that you may associate yourself or your beliefs, your groundings is absolutely fine, but it's an arbitrary amount of different ways you can do that, right?
Yeah.
And
it's another T-shirt, believe in the goodness of people. I think that would be something.
Yeah.
Well said, and very welcome here.
Thank you.
Martin Lundqvist, the CEO of Arundo Analytics.
Yeah.
We have so many topics to cover, but let's start a bit with you before we go into those topics.
Okay.
And how would you describe yourself? Who is Martin Lundqvist?
So demographically, born and raised south of Gothenburg. Grew up around computers, musical instruments, so kind of a music tech nerd type of guy.
So combination of music and tech. I've heard that before sometimes.
Yeah.
we have had a couple of guests who actually...
Surprisingly strong correlation between
There's a strong correlation. We have several synthesizer nerds.
You need to talk to the people booking this podcast, some more diversity going. But
could be some influence there.
I think I spent most of my youth behind the keyboard of some sort until I picked up a guitar. But still, there's strings involved.
Okay, so guitar now, yeah?
Well, I dabbled.
You dabbled?
Yeah.
And what made you sort of add the guitar to the repertoire?
Jimi Hendrix, of course.
Simple.
Of course. My dad is a huge Dire Straits fan. Martin Lundqvist, so those records were going in the boat in the summers when we were sailing, listening to Dire Straits all the time. So of course, the step to Jimi Hendrix was very short, and I picked up one of these books, with tablatures, and I took my dad's guitar and I started dabbling.
And so going from piano to synthesizer, are you going analog to electric in the guitar, or are you starting electric from the get-go almost?
Oh man, how much time do you have? No, so I'm a mix of. I'm a huge fan of Depeche Mode and that whole, but also a huge fan of Metallica and that whole world. And those two worlds collapsed for me in a very good way. So I would play Metallica on the guitar, and then I would try to reproduce Depeche Mode tracks on my sort of small setup I had. Yeah.
Do you believe there is a connection between interest in music and technology? Is there an advantage to actually have studied music to be good in technology, or vice versa?
Well, I think the question I would ask, I think the question that I see in what you're asking is, are there some traits that will naturally lead you to have those both interests? And I think for me, there is. I mean, I love being in the flow. And I don't know if my wife is listening to this, but she will confirm the fact that if I sit down now at the piano or behind the computer, I will just disappear for 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. And there's something in common with just getting into the flow and just focusing very much on something.
So you can do the same in programming, basically. You get in the flow in some way.
Yeah. I picked up coding again very recently, and I do this. I'll just kind of disappear. From 8
money totally immersed, or money totally absorbed.
Yes.
By the topic.
And you're frustrated, and you're working on it, and you're reading up, and you're learning, and you learn something new, and after 2 hours of frustration, you have this 1 minute of
maybe that is a similarity in mastering anything.
Yes.
Yeah, it sounds good. Yeah. Okay, but just to go through a bit about the background as well.
We got stuck. Sorry.
No, we're going to do this a lot. That we
go into rabbit holes all the time.
Yes, and we do it on purpose, so it's all good.
Yes. But you started also studying at what year, basically?
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, so basically, I think my parents informed me in a very gentle way that my future career does not lie in music, but my grades were fairly good, so I decided to do the most I can with the grades I had, and this answer to me was industrial economy, so industrial engineering in Linköping.
Linköping, that's a good place.
I love that place. It's a great place, Linköping. So I went there.
No subjectivity there, but I went there as well.
He's Linköping.
The alumnus are everywhere. So I studied there in industrial management engineering with a sort of a computer science and corporate finance angle to it. Ended up studying a year in Switzerland at the ETH, and then I spent another year there working at a bank with software.
What do you think about ETH? I mean, it has a very high
It's a
reputation.
beautiful building.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful building.
It's only the buildings.
The campus is amazing.
Yeah,
I had a great time.
Yeah. Well, what's good with ETH besides the building and having a fun time? You can have a fun time, I think, in Linköping or Chalmers and KTH as well.
Well, I mean, what I'm about to say now is in no way or shape meant as a criticism to any of the other universities that I may have set my foot on. But I have to say that the quality of the professors and the teachers at ETH, which is something else. Yeah. And
ETH, for people that don't know, is one of the top universities in Switzerland as well, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. It is one of those sort of top technical universities, I think, and I think they're able to attract the type of teachers that have been out there having careers for a long time, and they decide to go back to teaching. And they can do that while still maintaining some of the lifestyle that they enjoyed while being in the private sector. So you just have that next level quality of experience, I would say.
Having professor with actual experience in the private professional life.
That's a good combination.
It helps.
Awesome.
It helps.
Yeah, it helps. Yeah.
I mean, like I can just spin on that and imagine how much difference there is when someone can be theoretical, pause, and start driving storytelling anecdotes, applying and exemplifying.
Yes.
That must be quite good.
And you're spot on, and I think not that I particularly was into marketing, but I did take, because it was part of the program I did in ETH marketing classes, and the professor there, he did exactly that. So he had spent decades as a marketing officer at various consumer goods companies, and he did exactly that, right? So he had a theory, he had a framework, he had some evidence supporting the framework, and then we did case studies, his personal experience, went through them. And basically asked the question, how would you have solved this? And we went into teams, we thought about it, and then we came back, and then he said, this is how I solved it. And sometimes he would say that would not have worked, and sometimes he would say, that's a good idea, I should have done that.
Exactly.
And that just gives it a different experience.
But that's the next level. We have all done case studies at school. Let's do my case study.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, he wasn't the most humble guy. But
I like non-humble guys.
No,
sometimes. It's kind of
if you're the best, it's hard to be humble.
I wouldn't know.
Well said. Okay, but then you had a small period of time of your life at some company.
Yeah.
A little small piece of time.
Oh yeah, I know what you're referring to. Well, when I was about to finalize my studies, I was absolutely dead set that I'm going to start my own software company. There's no question about it, right?
Oh, you had an idea of entrepreneurship.
Oh, yeah. But I was more thinking, yes, in hindsight, it was an idea about entrepreneurship. It was not really an idea about entrepreneurship. It was an idea about just building software.
Okay. And did you have a clear idea what to build at that point?
Well, I had been helping out on the side a media company that was building different types of web applications, we would call them today. So kind of small games in Java and stuff like that. So I just wanted to start there, just build small things, right? And do it in my own setup. But of course, I graduated in the year, early 2000. Probably the worst time in history to start your own software company, right? So I just heard Plan B everywhere. And friends of mine that I had met at, or people I had met at in Zurich while studying there, they went into consulting. And so they suggested quite strongly that I should try the same.
And in 2001, it was a big IT crash for people that don't know it. A small one, or a rather big one, right?
It's a rather big one, yeah. The dot-com bubble burst, as the story goes. So I had friends that worked at McKinsey Company, and they suggested that I should apply, which I did. And my plan was to stay around for a few years and pick up some learnings, and then go back to starting my own thing. But no, as you are rightly sort of indicating here, I did end up staying there for quite a while longer.
Like 17 years, which is a really long time.
It's not a healthy time for anyone to have a job.
Maybe not. What do you think about that? If you look back over the years, do you think you should have switched job earlier, or was it still useful for you, and a good thing for you?
Because you do different jobs or different levels of a job, of course, in 17 years. It's not the same job.
But there are a few things that made it so obvious to me to carry on. One of them is what you're saying now, which is that like there's a different job every month, every quarter. There are new clients coming in with new types of problems. You're working with new teams. You get to see the world.
You get more seniority. Towards partnership.
And there is a clear path. Exactly. The career path is very clearly set. It's very attractive. The other thing is that you keep working with young people all the time, right? So you get older, but the people you're working with stay young. And that's a bit like being at campus. I love that, right? You have that fresh energy. Everybody is very driven, very ambitious, and very goal-oriented. So it makes for a very nice culture, kind of this culture of striving and just doing better and better. And then there was also the thing that I got to see many different industries. So I've never been too much of a traditional sort of having a traditional business interest as such. I have never been the guy that reads business magazines and keep up to date with business related, trends, etc. That's something that came later, but I was fascinated by problems, right? And the more weird the problems were, the more it fascinated me. And that is something that a place like McKinsey will bring you. You will have new types of problems all the time. And the other thing with a company like that, which is global, is every time there's a situation that unfolds, someone has seen something similar before. And there are, in those days, a phone call away, later an email away, and now I guess there's Slack away.
So you can still always evolve yourself and personally develop in your skills in a company like that?
And that was the, if I want to summarize it in sort of, on a nutshell, it is that. My personal growth the curve was incredibly steep, and it kept being steep.
It kept being steep over time. Which is, if you think about it, we are actually talking a lot about, should we pursue economies of learning instead of economies of scale? It's quite interesting. If you have a very, very steep learning curve, you might be in a very good spot in one way.
Yeah.
I have
before we go into that, we haven't really explained what McKinsey is.
No, and let me frame it.
Okay.
Because I was going to have a question which is more about a little bit of a rabbit hole. But let's start from that angle.
Yes.
So imagine we have some of our viewers who are sort of interesting and intrigued around consulting. Maybe some younger or someone who's thinking about switching into a management consultant career.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit on the outside. So first of all, who is McKinsey in this space? And it would be very interesting to hear someone who has been in this game for 17 years and done sort of the career or the sort of have a deep learning curve. If you could,
like the deep learning curve. There's double twist on that one.
That's a good one. You picked it up.
That's a second T-shirt.
Yeah. But
exactly.
Deep learning curve. Yeah. But the core question is McKinsey, and put that in context. But actually, could you educate us a little bit about what's the mechanics and what's the career path? How does a management consultancy work, or that allows you to stay for 70 years and have a great learning curve. So what is management consulting in your words in this way, and how does it work?
Yeah, sure. I'll get into it. And again, I'm a man of caveats, right? So I'll give you my experience of it, and there's by no stretch of the imagination am I going to sort of properly represent what the official view would be from anyone at McKinsey or any other management consultancy, right? Yeah. But I'll talk to it from my experience, right? And I think management consulting it was sort of born in the mid-20s, and it was an attempt to marry, at least in McKinsey's, in the case of McKinsey, marry a bit sort of the professional framework of a law firm with something which is more a scientific approach to management. As what James of McKinsey brought, I think, again, someone's going to fact check me, he brought kind of the science of management, which is the way you can understand companies is by analyzing workflows, analyzing organization, following the money, basically, right? And I think what Marvin Bower later brought, again, this is grossly oversimplified, is more the sort of framework and ethics of a law firm, long-term client relationships, having sustainable impact over time. The language was even different. So we didn't sell projects, we developed clients, we did studies, and we built relationships over time. So you have the combination of the framework of a law firm and then a scientific approach to management. That's kind of what.
And when you say the framework of a law firm, also the organizational construct.
I think
to some degree.
I think so. I mean, I believe one of the things that McKinsey, but companies of similar sorts hold very dearly is the notion of a partnership, a global partnership. And I think in McKinsey, I believe McKinsey is one of the few firms in the world that still have a properly global partnership where there is only one central profit pool. And what that really allows you to do is to create an atmosphere, an incentive of growing and helping, working internationally, bringing the best expertise in. And that is something that I saw the benefits of, at least, and it was one of the reasons I stayed around for so long as well.
And McKinsey is truly global, right? How many countries people is working at McKinsey?
Oh, now I don't know. It was growing so fast when I left. Yeah.
Approximately.
I will know. Maybe Mr. Fact Check.
Well, what's your number? Like when you left, how big was McKinsey? This is a couple of years back.
When I left, I think 13,000. Yeah.
And in most countries of the world as well, or was it some?
Well, in most, all over the place. I can't remember if we had 72 offices around the world, something like that. I mean, I stand to be corrected on these numbers. So I mean, to answer your question is what happens is that we, in those days, help clients to try and move forward and create alignment around tricky problems. Choice of market, organizational change, mergers and acquisitions. Of course, digitization was a big thing as well, embracing technology in the right ways, avoiding the pitfalls of where to invest, where not to invest in technology, and how to get the value out. So is that what
management consultants is about, or how would you define what management consultants are doing?
Well, it's providing advice to the C-suite in a nutshell. Yeah. But of course,
and then what they are providing advice on, does you have different branches and fields within management consulting?
Yeah, it's a matrix as always, and I think most management consultants is organized a bit in a matrix way. So there are industries and then there are practices, right? So you can do supply chain for manufacturing, or customer experience for consumer goods, and you will have people that are experts in the industry, you will have people that are experts in the function, in the intersection. You then have the actual clients that you're working with, which means that over time you can, and that is why I think the framework of a law firm kind of makes sense, because you have a person that is responsible for a client organization, and then that person can bring in the competences required, regardless of where they are in the world, to help sort out the problem at hand.
And now maybe a little bit not provocative, but a learning that I think we see when we talk about data and AI and really mastering value creation from data, algorithms, and software, and infusing that as part of core business. It starts to sort of dissolve the traditional silos of functions, and you get away from that organizational construct. You need to have cross-disciplinary teams, and you need to have an algorithm guy next to a data guy, next to the service designer guy, next to the business P&L guy. And all of a sudden, these functions kind of need to work in a holistic framework anymore. So how does that impact, if you want to give advice, if you're coming from a matrix that is sort of more structured to the more Tayloristic organizational construct? What do you think is happening here?
I have a tendency to oversimplify and generalize, so that's probably more rabbit holes coming out of this. But my simple framework is that there's people probably feel good having a functional home, a place where they feel this here is a field where I'm sort of kind of an expert. Something I know a bit better than something else. You can translate that to anything. Like, so do software development, maybe React a bit better than something else, right? As a home, that does not dictate what you do day to day. So the way I think about it is that there's a difference between your functional home and then what you do day to day. And I think, as you rightly point out, I would agree to that 100%. If you're developing software products, you need to integrate all the way from software design via engineering, data science, infrastructure, all the way down to control system integration and stuff that we have to do. That is a cross-functional team, and that's what they do on a day-to-day basis. But they still have a functional home if they choose to, right?
So in a way, we need to be T-shaped, right? We want to have a domain expertise.
That's well
home.
said, yeah.
So, but I think it's really emphasized in management and leadership and how you organize.
But I think also this is a core challenge from a lot of people. You want to have a cross-functional home or team, and you still want to have a functional home or team.
Yeah.
How do you fix that?
Well, we made a choice. So now this is a bit of a, and I say we now, I mean Arundo, so this is a bit of a segue, I guess, but we made a choice to say there needs to be one of these organizational dimensions needs to be the leading one, the one that kind of owns what we do as a company. And in our case, it's the product team.
Right.
So the frontline fighting units, if you will, I'm not going to use military. I'm going to use military terminology here, but
it's quite common to explain. Pedagogically, it's quite.
When there are guys around the table, yeah. So be careful.
Touché.
But the kind of the front line for us is the product team.
Yeah. And that means cross-functional.
And that's always cross-functional.
Yes.
Yes.
Because
but you still want to have a functional home.
Yes.
Right. So that's a complement, I guess, to the product team in some way.
It is, and the balance to strike is to, in our case, it is to communicate quite clearly that the buck stops with the product, i.e. So you belong to a function, perhaps. So you report into engineering, for example, or you report into delivery, or you report in somewhere else. And that's great, right? That's a place for you to discuss your personal development. It's a place for you to get coaching. It's a place for you to get that aspect of life and that aspect of growth. Yeah. Now, in terms of developing the product, in our case, which is what we're selling, the product team is allowed and encouraged to overrule any functional opinions that may come, right?
Yeah, because this is interesting, going for the value and the speed of the product versus the standard view of this is the engineering guardrail we have, as an example.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, as one example, we have, of course, a CTO in the company. His name is Christian. I love him. I don't think he's listening, but if he does, I love you. He has a very wide-ranging mandate in encouraging collaboration, encouraging discussing standards, etc. But the proof of the pudding is whether or not the product team chooses to use it. That's the proof of the pudding, right?
I find this extremely refreshing, and basically that how we understand, the enterprise guardrails in technology and all that. You are promoting, you are maybe investing, so you have more to support, but the proof is in the pudding if it's used.
Yeah.
And therefore, ultimately, there needs to be a flexibility and some level of anarchy, I would argue.
Yes.
In order to also push the right standards.
Yeah, and you want to encourage debate.
Yes.
I think, and
right. Really good.
And I don't want to. I don't want to make it. I don't want to get into the kind of the pros and cons of idea meritocracies, because I think that's a rabbit hole that we may not.
What was that word?
An idea meritocracy.
What is that? That sounds cool.
It's a way of governing where the best ideas win. But,
okay.
But it begs the question: how do you judge what a good idea is? So you're back to subjectivity again, right?
Good one.
Yeah. So, but I think what you want is the debate. I love the debates. I think the tension. There should be tension in the sense that if somebody has an idea, there should be a place for saying, I hear what you're saying. What about this problem here? What about that issue here? Now, if you have a setup where someone has the ability to overrule, which is not responsible for the outcome, you don't create the room for debate, right? You create the room for where it becomes compliance-driven. And I think you will lose on ideas if you do that. That's my sense.
And there are so many things here. We are working on something right now. And it's just this fundamental balance, how you organize from the core topic of efficiency versus adaptability.
Yes.
So if you can strike that balance, good one. I mean, and this is the rabbit hole as we're going up an S curve. We are innovating. We are becoming more mature. So it's also the idea what we are chasing. We are chasing innovation. We are chasing growth. Now it's plateauing. Now we're chasing efficiencies. But to think about efficiency versus adaptability, you can't have that without a balance.
You can't have it without the balance.
Without debate.
Debate, yeah, exactly, debate. The other thing is that wherever you are on that S curve, they're all exciting problems.
Yeah, of course.
And technically, they can be just as exciting.
Exactly.
We're in a state of maturity in one of our products where it's now about kind of automating the way we're onboarding customers, getting efficiency out of those processes. It's just as exciting as building it out, right?
But isn't it the core topic then that you need to be super aligned as a whole organization? Where are we in our journey now to really understand, are we here for growth and speed and hyperscaling? That's a different ball game than now we're here for super automation and efficiency and scalability. Maybe, I don't know. So it's like, so what I'm trying to say is as you're moving on the curve, we need more adaptability sometimes, and we need less adaptability in other areas.
Yeah, and company of ours, we've been around for a while now, right, in 2015. So technically people would call us a scale-up, I guess. But I mean, we are in parallel, working on fairly mature products, thinking about the efficiencies of onboarding, etc., as we talked about. But we're also discovering new products or new ways of configuring our existing products. So I think the thing, for me, I'm not sure that talking about the entire organization has to be one or the other is helpful. But if you look at that question in a higher resolution, it's more like the certain products will have, or certain product teams will have certain priorities in certain times.
Yeah, makes total sense.
But you need to find stability in something. And I believe personally that some reasonable stability in who's on the team is important. Not only for the product, but for the people on the team. That I think can be quite important. It also has to do with knowledge and continuity.
Yeah. There were so many angles here we can go.
I mean, just to add one more point, and I know a very controversial topic, both in Spotify, Times, and other companies, has been, sure, you belong to a team, and Spotify had this kind of, matrix organization, or reversed, rotated matrix, with squads and chapters and whatnot, and the chapters was more functional, and you had and then you had the cross-functional teams. But another question is really, how are you physically seated, located in an office to, promote the best type of atmosphere, productivity, joy? I know this is such a hard topic to discuss, and you perhaps don't have even offices these days, so it's not even a question. But do you have any thoughts from your McKinsey days, perhaps, in what is the best way to group people physically in an office?
Well, I would probably not necessarily attribute these thoughts to my McKinsey time, but I can share some more recent thoughts, because this is literally as we speak. I mean, February 4th or something, Norway opened up. February 9th, we opened up. So this is where things are starting to unfold. And together with our chief organization and people officer, Anne, love you, Anne, as well. You're probably not listening to this, but we thought about this a lot, right? And we have two offices. We have one office in Houston, one office in Oslo, physical offices. What we saw during the pandemic, of course, is that people are able to not only work productively, but even more productively, and be reasonably, if judging by the normal ways you measure these things, satisfied at work, right? So productivity did at least not go down, not on average. If I look, we don't measure things like ticket velocity or anything like that, but you can see it, right? Yeah. Did at least not go down. In fact, we released some of our most prominent products in the middle of the pandemic, and people were reasonably satisfied. Now, I believe still, although I don't have any numbers to back this up, I believe that there is a trade-off in building a cohesive culture. And we don't know how to manage that yet. We don't know what the trick here is yet. No. But what we see very clearly, and you've seen all the research as well, right? The ability to offer hybrid and remote work seats is now a competitive advantage in the talent market. Yeah. Especially when you're hiring technical staff.
And we have been in a super hot or overheated talent market in data. Yeah, software. We have the number of, we're lacking 70,000 software engineers in Sweden, or whatever that number is. Yeah. And of course,
I only need 3.
The point is, of course, then it's the traditional, is it a buyer's market or a seller's market right now as well, right? Well. So I don't know, but I think there are so many trade-offs here. But what I argue, if I can keep people super happy, super motivated, having fun, and being able to solve their life puzzle, I think that is probably going to create more efficiency than maybe. So it's a little bit like, how much have you to lose or gain in this game? And I think there are. My hypothesis is that you probably have more to gain in productivity over here. So it's easy here that you stare on one KPI and you sub-optimize. So I truly believe you can in some theory have a more efficient team, everybody sitting in the same room. Ideally, get one team cross-functional and do it physical. Fantastic, right? Yeah. But to what cost in other? What is the opportunity cost of making that happen? So
I think there are two. So I would agree with everything you said. I would add to that I would put 2 assumptions in that and say that if these 2 assumptions are true, then everything you said holds true. Number 1, everybody lives close to the office. Number 2, there are rules around interrupting each other during flow time. If those 2 are satisfied, I agree with what you said. I think the reality is that people don't live necessarily. No, and also you have, people get, they have families and they move out of town, and some of our staff have 1.5 hours up to even 2 hours commute.
So that's the opportunity cost.
That's the opportunity cost. Yeah.
And if you're working a lot with Scania, and I've worked before with Vattenfall and had my team in sort of Berlin, Amsterdam, and Stockholm. I mean, like, some things make sense that we could do in Stockholm,
but
the other places simply don't make sense. We need to solve it somewhere else. And all of a sudden now, if I have people in Amsterdam, Berlin, and Sweden, does it really matter if I put my software engineers in Poland? Does it really, so all of a sudden we have other constraints.
Question, right? The constraints are different now. I fully agree. And the other thing I think, this is the way I experienced it, is that the talent market went, wholesale global during the pandemic. So also all of a sudden you have the ability for people to pick jobs anywhere, and even to pick 2 jobs, right? And be able to do them both well because you choose to. And that is just that's just very different. I don't think we know how to.
I think there is some sort of paradigm shift here, and we're talking about this a lot. Like which part of the industry will go back completely to normal? And we have had a lot of rants around the conference industry, sort of where we are trying to push the envelope of making more real, building a digital experience or like a bigger experience. And we see, some dinosaurs simply want to go back to how it was, right? And it's like, I'm not sure that's going to fly, but we'll see. But
this is a rabbit hole I went into, and I'll try not to drag you all into it, right? But I came across this article, which was not a new article. I can't remember the author now, but it was an investigation of how did we end up in offices. And it was very interesting, right? So it comes from the fact, it's come from the Industrial Revolution, of course. All of a sudden, you had to move from the farms into the city, and then you were actually physically required to work on the plant, right, or in the mine.
Yep.
And that is a tradition that carried over into the services industry. But if you think about it, it's a bit of a weird setup, right? So you're grouped together with people you did not choose to be with, or kind of artificially in a space to do work together. And you do it for a very big portion of your time. So now I'm paraphrasing the paper, and it was again, let's get out of that rabbit hole. But I found it kind of interesting. How come we're sitting in offices?
But you have to agree that there are some good office or pros with having an office.
Oh, for sure.
I think one of the really core things is the coffee machine effect in some way.
It's right? So good.
If you set up meetings, you usually have a predefined agenda. You speak about what you are supposed to speak about. But to find this kind of informal kind of discussions, how do you do that in a non physically located way?
Yeah.
Is there a way to do that in a hybrid setting as well?
We've done some experimentations. So first, I just want to agree with what you said. And if I came across as if I'm anti being in the office, then I should kind of retract that impression immediately. I'm not. I should say I'm an agnostic. Yeah. I'm kind of introvertedly inclined. So, of course, I don't mind having space for myself. Now, having said that, I think there are a few things that we want to keep that we learned during the pandemic. For example, discipline in meetings. The discipline in how we ran meetings, how we prepared for meetings, how we documented meetings went up for sure.
Yeah. I think so too.
Yeah, and people are on time. Yeah. I also think that we learned something around etiquette for Zoom and Teams meetings,
right?
Which I think we should keep.
Always still struggle with the technical setup in the beginning of meetings.
I know, isn't that weird?
Still,
we've come so far.
But the whole etiquette of meetings, that is a metric that completely went up. Yes. Because we had so many of them, and the retro from one day, when we sit the whole day, okay, we can't do the same shit 1 hour later in the next meeting with the same people. We need to, the iterative effect worked.
It really did work, and I think that's something I would like to keep. Something I would like to bring back is the coffee machine effect, as you're talking about. Definitely. The other thing I would like to bring back is the opportunity to just get to know people beyond the formalized Zoom meeting. I actually think, and this is a speculation, so I don't know if this is absolutely true. I'm inclined to think that some of our engineers that are used to pair programming and found the ways of doing that through the tooling we have, they kept some of that going. But for me, it felt, and for many of my other colleagues, it kind of got a bit lonely at times, I have to say.
Yeah. Because ultimately we are also physical human beings, and we are a social being.
Yes.
And there's some merit to how do you keep the humanism and the social welfare if you don't meet anyone.
Yeah, we are different for sure. Some people actually get very lonely, and they are not being as happy as they are if they actually can work with people physically. Right?
Exactly. And that brings me to another thing that I found really interesting, and that is there was a certain type of personality that fared very well when we're all in the office all the time. And there's another sort of personality that has now fared better than ever before.
Yes.
So we saw people that previously were sitting maybe hiding a bit in the corner, all of a sudden stepping up, acting more as leaders because they were acting through communication channels or media that were more comfortable to them.
Yeah.
That was really interesting to see.
That is super cool.
Yeah, and the other thing we noticed is that we've been surveying a bit and also reading research on how and when do which types of people want to go back to the office and what they're going to use the office for. There's a big variety here. There are certain people that say that I really wouldn't mind never going to the office. This is a small portion, right? And then there are people saying, I really want to be in the office because my apartment is just not conducive to doing work, or
And some people don't have the self-discipline to
don't
work
have
at
the
home.
self-discipline,
They
right?
turn on the TV and they
circumstances which are just life circumstances, right? And then there are other people that are sort of somewhere in the middle. But what is very clear across is that one thing we do need, and going back to the original question you had, one thing that we do need to do, and we are experimenting with, is creating more of happenings. So kind of
Informal
socially inclined events that bring people into the office, like lunch and quiz, just simple things like that. Brought 17 people back to our Oslo office the other week, and it was so much fun. It sounds a bit timid. How is this going to be? But then pulled off beautifully, and everybody had lots of fun. And it brings people together, gives something, and you get to know your new colleagues. So, because we've been hiring in a situation where
that's another one.
Never met the people physically that I've been hiring.
Cool.
One thing that you're missing in this is the sense of belonging.
Yes.
Right? Because we are doing some conferences on people analytics. And this is actually, so the productivity is going up, the resignation is going up, but the sense of belonging is actually going down.
Yeah.
Right? And that is why we have offices, because you can speak, you can innovate without having meetings, you can have a purpose of, waking up in the morning, go meeting other people, and then align your beliefs with somebody else. That's why you are joining a company as well. It's not because of the work, you're joining as well because of the purpose and the image and all of these other things. So we cannot just basically take that on a side.
No, you're right.
But there is a variety for sure. So
I think I fully agree to that, and I would expect, although again I don't know if this is true, but I would expect that one of the reasons that this big quit or great resignation that we're talking about now was the consequence of having sat behind your laptop for 2 years, and that sense of belonging or loyalty in relation to just switching jobs maybe and getting some other things that you were looking for in life, that trade-off just switched quite fast, and changing jobs is less about moving to a new city, moving to a new environment. It's basically logging on to a different Zoom link.
right.
Actually, the whole sort of how do you build up the barrier to entry or the barrier to change was disappearing because, as you said, I had built up this mental picture of the effort or the risk to switch jobs, and that really went down in terms of practicality, like what you said.
And again, I don't want to come across as I'm like the glass half full guy all the time here, but what I will say as at least for us, healthy reaction to this was if the reason to be at a company, at our company, for example, if that reason is no longer how great the office is, we need to go back to the original purpose of why we're here. So working on that it's really become important to try and come back to articulating what are we here for, and to kind of create that belonging, which ideally would transcend physically where you're at.
And let's get back to Arundo very soon. But before we do that, perhaps we should close off also the McKinsey time, the small time of 17 years. And let me just perhaps ask a bit difficult question, but I think a lot of people would be interested in hearing this, because you collected a lot of knowledge, a wealth of knowledge about consultant management skills in some way, management consultant skills. And okay, so if you were to perhaps list the top 3-5 misconceptions that the C-suite people have in how to run a business, what would you say they are?
Wow. The top 3 misconceptions for how to run a business
that you had to correct in some way, or try.
You think about during my McKinsey days, or the things?
Yes.
So one thing that I kept coming back to, and this is actually related to what we talked about before, is the notion of breaking the silos. And actually, if you think about the last 4 or 5 decades of different managerial approaches and frameworks for achieving change, and you can go back to using the stopwatch on the on the automotive assembly line, yeah. And then you can go into business process management, and then you go into Toyota production system and lean, and then you can go into, you can continue that journey. And what they all had in common was sort of the approach of looking across, kind of disregarding the functional setup, disregarding the organizational setup, and just watching what was going on and documenting with as much data as you could the way things worked, and then daring to take the consequences of what you found. And I think I don't know if I would construe this as a misconception, but I would say that many companies have underestimated the amount of change to incentive structures that may be needed in order to achieve that cross-functional change.
Right.
Because
so incentives in what way? How can you build incentives to break the silos?
Well, we're going to go back to the first T-shirt that you authored, which is "I believe in the goodness of people." And what I mean by that, what I mean by that is, I think it's a rare case that any person would act in malice.
Right.
So if you're responsible for a part of a company's organization, I think it's a rare case that you are deliberately acting maliciously or unproductively.
Yes.
I think you have an incentive system around you somehow. It can be a formal incentive system, but it can also just be a culture. It can also be the colleagues, you watch how they act around you. Right. But there is a framework that awards a certain behavior. That framework has to change, and often you have to change many pieces of that framework in order for you to actually dare to make the change. And I think often organizations underestimate that because they over-rely on the logic.
Oh, but this is so true, holds so true in my ears, especially if you've been in larger enterprises. You have very different agendas, KPIs, and sometimes even competing mandates that needs to be balanced. And therefore, the incentive systems in the different parts of the organization are there to achieve different things.
Yes.
And the challenge is that we are trying to, in all our best efforts, get that out. But I give the example, large organization, we want to innovate, and we need to be really digital at all this. At the same time, we should have a KPI that minimizes FTE in engineering and data. Yeah. Of course, these are competing, right?
Yes.
And there we will have friction.
Yes.
It's simple as that, right? So here we are trying to fix data and AI and be more organized like that. And I've said that before, and this is really my home turf where I'm trying to sort out. When you go in this direction, you're not going to get to the value creation if the organization, the steering is not aligned with this. And we talked about how we organize the team. This is one topic, right? But I think you nail it, because if you think about the incentive structure and the mandates, they come from a certain organizational construct that you did and some, objectives for that.
Yeah.
And if they don't align with what, minimizes friction, let's say that, let's call it that.
Yeah.
But any good tips on that? How do you change the incentives? How do you have clear incentives for people to move in the right direction, to break the silos and whatnot? Can you do you have some examples of how to actually do that?
Well, I don't. Again, all right. Let me give you one or two ideas at least. These are not novel in any sense, but this is just stuff that I've experienced. I think you need in some cases, and this is not right for all organizations, but in some cases you actually need to do something that you could kind of call an affirmative action. Sometimes this is called a digital incubator, or sometimes it's called a central team that is responsible for driving some change.
Right.
But you create this external change. You create an event that sort of forces people into this uncomfortable area of thinking differently.
Right.
I think that is necessarily for the discovery.
Yeah.
And if you do it right, you manage to do it through self-discovery. And this goes to my next point, which is you can change incentives and formally you can rewire the organization. You can try to act differently to inspire a change in culture, but you can't make a person want something if they don't want it. But a person is more likely to want to do something if that next step is familiar. So that's why I'm saying self-discovery. So if you yourself discover somebody's giving you advice, perhaps, if somebody's showing you a new cool tool, and you see that there's something familiar here, I know my area of responsibility. This actually builds on my normal experience of what I do at work, right? So if I'm an operator of a part of a chemical plant, for example, and I see a new tool that speaks my language and actually shows me some new information that I otherwise would go through great pains of achieving, it is more likely that that level of familiarity will lead me to using this new tool than if it comes from left.
Right. Yeah. So if someone comes up with innovative changes by themselves, it's much more efficient than it comes like forced upon them. Is that what you're saying?
I think it's more likely that they're going to adopt something that they feel like, I've kind of... One part of it is discovering yourself, but the other one is that it feels somewhat familiar. It's not forcing you to go. I'm not speaking for all individuals now, right? So there are people that love the notion of something new and something, depending on which industry you're in. Now, we as I'm not saying that this is a segue to Arundo necessarily, but we work with heavy industrial companies. So the likelihood that you're going to find someone who loves change is smaller for the very natural reason that these are very critical systems and processes to run. You do not want to introduce change too often.
Or like if you work with heavy assets or critical systems like that, there is a certain rigor to how you do change.
Oh, absolutely.
So the point is that brings a culture and a way of working that is self-persevering, I would argue, versus in another industry where experimentation has no real risk in the same way.
Yeah,
you can have another culture.
That's it, right? So, for example, if you are providing advice to your customers on which next product to buy, it's okay if you recommend the wrong product. It's not okay if you recommend the wrong action in a chemical processing plant.
But still, I think experimentation and innovation is really hard, even when there is little risk. I mean, of course, it's harder when you do have a high risk, and there's a lot of cost and time involved in actually making the change. But even perhaps for digital companies like Spotify or whatnot, it can be really hard to take advantage of all the ideas that comes up. I know this was a big frustration. We tried to do so many things with hack weeks and hack days and one after the other, and so many people did come up with awesome ideas, but to actually make them go to production or actually come to value for the company was super, super hard.
Yeah.
But
just to build on that, one thing that I am seeing and I think this might be more the norm among engineers or people with an engineering background, is it's easier to poke holes in ideas than to get into the merits of them. And I think our ability, if we take an engineering mindset, our ability to see the weaknesses in an argument or in the way a solution is being formulated, that is a strength. It is a real strength, and it's so useful. But it also becomes a weakness and a problem when we overuse that. So I see so many times there's a very great there's an innovative idea coming from someone, and then immediately you find 15 ways that it won't work.
Yeah, exactly. We've done that, tried that.
Tried that. And
I have this kind of destructive, non-constructive kind of rhetoric. It's so much easier and it's safer because you're usually right. But the really hard and valuable thing is if you do come up with constructive ideas.
Yeah, and I don't know where this notion came from, but even if it feels safer not to do something, that is actually a risky move sometimes too. Yeah. So one thing that I think is important to do is when the decision is not to do something, to actually assess what is the risk of that decision. Yes. Because there's kind of inherent risk in everything.
And we have talked about early on the pod, and I think this is almost, I'm not sure if it's a Swedish culture. I mean, there is clearly a culture that if I didn't make a yes decision here, or if I didn't make any decisions, I'm home free. Yeah. And it's like this, hold on, you forgot that your decision, by not acting on this, you actually made a decision. And that decision actually is no to change.
Yes.
But we have some sort of challenge here, I think, in larger organizations where it's to some degree culture okay to not make decisions, and this is sort of not seen as as you get away with doing nothing as not making it. Do you see what I mean, right?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
So we how do we basically hold ourselves accountable for doing nothing, right?
Yeah.
And that is a tricky one that I think.
Cool. And let's try to climb out of this rabbit hole a bit. But I think if you go back a bit to the top misconceptions, unless you had some strong ending point there, but it would be fun to just try to extract your knowledge a bit here from McKinsey days. And one is, if I try to summarize, breaking the silos in some way, trying to have the right incentives to actually promote that kind of behavior, and in that way also promote innovation and change.
Yeah, the ultimate thing, right? We have the silos not because people are malice, because we have incentive systems that put them there.
Yeah, informal or formal, yes. or experienced at least. Yes. Yeah. Well, if you want a second one, I can offer a second one, and then maybe we can close that out. And that is finding the right balance between having a good strategy versus being ready for change when it happens. And what I often say is that if I had the choice of being able to see around the corner versus being able to change for whatever appears, I would rather put my money on being able to change for whatever appears. And striking a balance there is also something where...
This is profound.
No, but I think that there is sometimes an over... And of course, as a management consultant, we did a lot of strategies. But we also did a lot of work on getting organizations ready for change. But I think adaptability is... and of course, you can go back in evolutionary theories that adaptability is why we're here, right? Fitness. So I think I would say that one... maybe not misconception, but on the balance of where you put your money, I would say that many companies maybe put more money on trying to see the future versus being ready for it when it arrives, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. But let me still challenge that a bit, just to clarify a bit what we mean. I mean, for one thing, you want to have a long-term vision in some way, and at least know that this is where we want to be in a couple of years. But... so if you go only incremental change approach, where you say, this is where we are today, if we move this small baby step in this direction, that's a good thing, perhaps adapting potentially to the current situation that we have. But if we only do incremental change, wouldn't that also be a risk then?
Yeah, I think you're spot on, and let's get the higher solutions out here, right? Because I made a joke once that if you go fully agile, all of a sudden you're telecom company is in the restaurant business before you know it, right? Because people will just kind of take an incremental step in the direction that feels good at the time, right? That's an over-exaggeration, of course, but you're absolutely right. I think, and it goes back to what we said before, having a clear view on why are we here and what are we trying to achieve, and then you need guardrails. So there are certain things we're not going to do as a company, for example, right? So having that clear. But then you need to allow a bit of experimentation and freedom in terms of how are we going to get there. And there I think fostering a culture of adaptability is quite important. But you're absolutely, we can't forget completely where we're headed. If you don't see point B, people are just going to wander around, right? So clear view on where are we, A, clear view on where we're heading, B, and then you just get a culture that can take the obstacles away as they are thrown at you while you're traversing that.
I have to make just a small Elon Musk quote again. I think he phrased it really nicely, because in some way he said, he always have a very clear mission and vision with, for example, SpaceX, which is that they want to go to Mars, and they want to do that as quickly as they can. And then for every change they make, if they're going to change a small screw in some rocket somewhere, they or he thinks, will this small change in this type of screw or this other type of screw actually make us come to Mars faster or not? This is the type of thinking you should have. So every small incremental change should move in a direction of a long-term vision. Would you agree with this? Or is Elon Musk wrong?
I think I like the direction that argument is taking. I think it can be overused, so it can lead to a bit of paralysis, because you may overthink every small step. I think that's a risk of it. But I think, and this is maybe more philosophical, on a more philosophical note, but if in hindsight we talk about disruptions, talk about change, but most of this happen in incremental steps. Change is rarely of the sort that you wake up one morning and you end up, wow, I can do this. No, it happened over 15 years, right? So I think the notion of change and disruption is a hindsight construct in many ways. So I'm making this unnecessarily black and white for the sake of the argument.
But in some ways here, I agree with the first notion of adaptability, but I see it a little bit different here. So, and I just had coming from a day of nothing and working on exactly similar topics for a keynote in Data Innovation Summit in Dubai on the 7th, I guess. Yeah. So we're working collecting the research we're doing into a keynote right now, and we're trying to understand what's the essence of what we're working on. And we are right now talking about the difference of the economics of scale or versus the economics of learning, and then we come into this topic around efficiency versus adaptability. And Mikael Klingvall, the guy I'm working with, he did his PhD trying to understand what's the ultimate balance of heterogeneity versus homogeneity in an organization, with the fundamental topic of how do you optimize the balance between efficiency and adaptability. Now, in this context, now adaptability, incremental efficiency, incremental improvements on the curve you're on, that is more innovation for efficiency. Versus adaptability is maybe more profound, bigger changes. Now, the argument we are discussing now is that, this is the conversation we had. It's like, if you think about innovation right now, in order to be efficient on the curve you're at, and we are putting this in the context of 2022 and the rapid technology change, data, AI, software, and ultimately, you need to be very careful now how you innovate, that you actually don't stifle yourself with trying to make old technology efficient, rather than there is another way of doing this with AI, which it has a 10x improvement on this. So adaptability for me now goes in a slightly different light, that I need to have a learning organization, the economies of learning, the economies of seeing what's out there and then adapting to it and incorporating that. So basically, we are doing this, we're trying to automate our financial processes. Well, the way we have done it before with an ERP system, maybe we shouldn't continue building all the shit inside the ERP system. Maybe there are other technologies
There was a time and a place for that.
There was a time and a place where this was the shit. But maybe if you learn and adapt from other topics. So adaptability for me comes with a purpose in mind. The long-term purpose becomes really key.
Yes.
But how can I now sort of 10x, how can I be innovative in a way to clearly pivot on my approaches? So you see what I mean with that? For me, adaptability comes quite high up on this, that from economics of scale and we organize for efficiency, and this is the industrial revolution, gone to the later part of the S curve. Now we're into a new macro life cycle, data, AI, software first kind of thing, and we need to rethink everything, and then it goes so super fast. It's a different way.
I think I like the notion of the economics of learning. I've heard economics of skill before, but economics of learning, I really like that notion. I might add a few things to what you said. One is, I'm thinking if you think about this at sort of on an atomic level, where does the adapting actually happen? So organizationally, who is adapting to what? And I'm thinking delegation is a very important part of what you're saying.
Yes,
I think so there is a bit of it. Let's say it traditional as a leader or as an owner of a company, having the courage, if you will, to delegate more and more of that decision making that needs to happen in order to try new things down into the team, so as close to the problem as possible.
As close to the problem and the competence to solve that particular problem.
That's exactly right. So this goes back to the vision, right? So if you're clear on the problem that you're going to solve, and actually, if you look at the rate of innovation in technology, the way you can use data, the amount of data, the types of data, the complexity of data that's available to you, it's going to change. It keeps changing. I suggest that the one thing that is reasonably stable over time is the problem.
Yes.
The nature of the problems we're solving.
How we solve it is
changing all the time, right? So if you can keep the vision clear, this is the problem that this group of people are trying to solve, and they're really excited about it, and you give them the power, the encouragement, and the resource to experiment and learn. I think that's at least part of getting to where you're.
I think you're spot on, because we are talking about the new organizational paradigm, which is the fractal organization. So how do you build a mesh of the different units that needs to have their clear purpose The problem now becomes how we don't make them into silos, but we have what we talk about, the strategy to execution path, the vertical path, we call that navigation. And then the orchestration, the horizontal, how can we reuse and harvest in between teams, and how can we keep a purpose? So this becomes something else, right? The Tayloristic organization or even the matrix doesn't really solve this. It's more federated.
It's more federated, and it leads to a different rabbit hole, which we have been doing a lot of thinking about, well, not acting around, I would say, which is creating unique technology IP that you can reuse. So that's also part of this, right? Because you want to build
harvest
things,
and reuse.
You want to harvest. Good, thank you.
Harvest and reuse. You cannot forget harvest.
No, but exactly. And the thing is, when do you harvest? Do you harvest after you built it, or do you try to build it first without knowing whether you can harvest it? This is
huge.
Yeah, what we at least have found is that, and I don't know if I don't think there's an organization, but if you are lucky enough, as we are, at least at this point in time, to have individuals that are solving a problem, having in mind the way they're solving it, there are bits and pieces of what we're doing now that might be abstracted afterwards. We're not going to worry about that now. We're going to solve this problem right here, right now. Afterwards, we're going to see if we can abstract and extract something reusable here. I think, at least if you're a fast-moving startup, I personally believe that is a very useful approach, because if you're able to keep those two thoughts in your head at the same time, because you can go after the customer, the product, the money, strictly speaking, that you need in order to show the growth, while at the same time thinking and allowing yourself a week after the final retro, okay, what can we abstract out of this?
Yeah, so you're spot on. We are drawing this on a very simple vertical axis versus horizontal axis, and we're putting the value creation money-wise on the vertical action, and we're putting the data, AI, software, DNA on this axis, and then we are trying to find the vehicles in the product first, but what can we harvest and reuse and extrapolate on that? But it's the governance.
Sometimes you're surprised.
But then what's the glue that allows people to harvest in between teams?
You haven't said goosebump for a long time. That's just weird. Okay, cool.
Want to keep going?
I want. He wants to keep going.
We have to finish to the next step in your journey as well. And but this was some really interesting topics, I think. I'm still frustrated about not getting into technical topics, but let's continue.
Is technical, but this is organizational technical.
Business topics.
We'll get there.
Awesome. But at some point, and for some reason, you actually made a big switch from McKinsey and did something else. How did that come about?
Well, I had the privilege of spending my last 3 years at McKinsey building starting the build-up of a global digital government practice. So it was starting the establishment of a capability to serve governments around the world on topics related to digitization.
Yes.
And what happened then is that I had a fantastic time. I got to travel and work with governments in New Zealand, in Australia, in the UK, in the US, in the Middle East, all around Europe, of course in Sweden. Met great people that really sort of found themselves in this, very complex governance that often, is the case when you think about public sector.
And what type of government organizations did you work with?
So it was a mix of federal and state level. I am prohibited by confidentiality clauses to name the names, but typically these were social insurance agencies. Typically the way I chose to think about where to try and move the digital topic forward inside governments, it's again, where does money come out and where does money come in? So you have tax and insurance. So a lot of work with tax agencies, finance departments, and then of course money out is welfare, insurance, lending, public lending, and then 1/3 additional one, which is inspiring growth in the economy by, for example, simplifying the way you start a business or simplifying the way you
incubator kind of things as well.
But also even
taking away bureaucracy for that's
digitizing tax declarations for big companies. Name one place where that has worked out, right? Except maybe Estonia. So anyway, very sorry for that. But in doing so, I rekindled my passion for technology in a very profound way. Because not only did I get to meet these very innovative and sort of grand thinking government officials or public sector servants that wanted to make change happen. We talk a lot about how to do that, but I also got to meet a lot of startups, and I hadn't met the startup for a decade and a half almost, right? And I just felt this culture, and I just kind of it reminded myself, hang on, this is what I wanted to do back in 2000.
That's your finance software engineering company.
This is what I wanted to. Yeah, so you could say I did a big change, but I kind of closed the loop. That's why I think about it.
So it was a nice continuation in some way.
Yeah, it was the 2-3 year of Plan B, which became Plan A, and then coming back again to my passion.
And
the circle is closed.
Yeah,
but the personal angle here, how was the fear factor, or out of your comfort zone, or was it just this is a no-brainer, let's go for it, or how was your mental picture here, or your thinking as an individual?
There were some healthy therapist bills associated with this, and that's not even a joke. That is the truth. No, it was difficult. It was very difficult. I mean, regardless of what you do, if you spend, and even if it's as dynamic as being in consulting, if you've done it for almost 2 decades, it does something to you. You're
who you are, maybe.
Yeah,
is this who I am?
Of course, you're technically rewired, right? So you're chemically and biologically rewired for a certain context. And I had to unwire that, which technically can. So I had to find new wires that were stronger. Yeah. What I would say though is the switch to Arundo was made easier by the fact that it was founded by one of my most amazing colleagues that I ever met at McKinsey. So Tor Jakob Ramsøy, who founded Arundo in 2015.
And were you part of funding it as well, or was it?
No.
Okay.
I joined as a seed investor.
Yeah.
So I consider myself having been part of the family, let's say, from the beginning.
Yeah.
But very passively, right? But when Arundo then raised they did the Series A in 2017, and Tor Jakob said, "Hey, it's time for you to become a bit more active." And that coincided with me having a bit of this sort of, reignited passion.
40-årskris.
You said it. Having a bit of a 40-årskris and
the middle-age crisis. Yeah, I was joking.
Isn't it beauty? Well, it landed well. It landed well. Yeah. No, so that made the switch a bit less dramatic, because I knew that there was a family waiting for me that I already know that I would enjoy being with.
Cool. And let's go just back to the basic. What does Arundo do?
We build industrial analytics software. So in a nutshell, our thesis is that there is an enormous amount of telemetric data being generated and having been generated for a long time in the heavy asset industries. And our thesis is that you can make better use of that. You can inform your actions and your decisions on how to run that more sustainably and more efficiently by using that data. And in the early years, we did a lot of POCs, of course, as everyone does. I don't know how many 100 sort of data science studies we did in different types of data for different types of equipment, and experimented with becoming a platform company. First was an algorithm company, find a magic algorithm, and then building a platform that would allow other data scientists to wire data up, so more like an ML ops effort, if you will, although that word didn't exist back then. And now we're solidly a product company. We've figured out that what we are good at, what we think is necessary, are applications that allows technicians and process engineers to understand and act differently. Not in the platform game, but in the product game.
We have so many. You keep this one now, because I want to really understand what that means. This sounds great, and I have many angles here that we can pursue, but let's really unwrap it first.
So industrial analytical software, and being able to take advantage of all the telemetry data or whatnot that do exist. Can you just give some example of how does that really work?
Sure. I mean, one example would be cranes. And this is a topical example, because I learned this morning that one of the customers that I'm allowed to talk publicly about, McGregor, we are part of the technology ecosystem around an application they've built, which is called OnWatch Scout.
What once again?
OnWatch Scout.
OnWatch.
So that application allows operators of cranes to consume KPIs and different types of data-driven insights
as in their operation.
In their operations, we're talking about offshore cranes, 450 ton, 2 kilometers wire for offshore services installations like wind farms, etc. It allows them to figure out whether to run the crane differently under certain circumstances.
Wind, for instance.
Wind, heave, compensation. Yes. There are hydraulic systems, and so it allows to extend the lifetime and avoid breakdowns, which can be costly. So that's an example, which is quite concrete.
So Are we speaking about making the company more data-driven in terms of the product, or in terms of more how the business is run, like a BI purpose, or what type of analytical software are you speaking about here?
So maybe we can start. There are many different angles. So maybe we can start from the top, right? So the thing that we are obsessed about is improving the operations. We talked about latching onto the problem. So we tried to do that. So the problem we're trying to solve is to help engineers, technicians, process engineers to run their part of a process or their equipment more safely, more efficiently, more sustainably. That's the problem we're trying to solve. Right. How we do that is the thesis, which is that we're a data analytics company. Yeah. So our contribution to this problem is going to be, is there signal, patterns, insights in the data under leverage today in resolving that mission?
Right.
So the way the product works then is, now it might become a bit technical.
Yeah, please go.
That's what he's been waiting for that.
Okay, so there was a top-down version.
You try him, and then he will take you further until you stop.
Okay, so now I'll tell the story from the equipment up instead, right?
Yeah, okay.
So the capabilities we've built is the ability to extract data from the edge, very source, so a control system, a PLM or a DCS. Yeah. Typically a SCADA system. Yeah, so that's
typical sensors. That is typically now SCADA is one type of very high standard or normal standard.
That is one standard, right?
Typical time series data.
It's all time series data.
Always time series data.
With some interesting caveats, which could be another rabbit hole to go into.
Could you take some more, other types of data in adventure with that as well? Some images of, how the crane is looking or whatnot.
We can get there. Yeah. I'll tell you the 99% of the time path, and we can get into the 1% time of the path. But okay. No, so we have one piece of software that allows you to extract that data from the systems, and then run models and do pre-processing at the edge.
Right.
And that is, so we built that because we had to. Mm-hmm. So again, you can ask, why are you in the business of building out an ingester, a local piece of software with all the pains associated with that, if your mission is over here to do this? So we had to.
It's the value chain. You need to sort out the value chain, the data value chain.
And we realized that in many cases, these equipments are in very rugged environments at sea. There's no satellite connectivity necessarily consistently being available. And if there is, people would rather watch Netflix than send 1 gigabyte of sensor data every hour. Yeah. I'm not kidding. That is, people will pull the network out to get better connectivity so they can FaceTime with their kids. This is a real thing, right? Yeah. So we had to have some way of storing data consistently and reliably under all circumstances. Right. And when we started our journey, there wasn't such a thing out there. So we built that part of the product. So that is what that does. And in order there are some analytical algorithms that require a performance, in particular latency, that makes a cloud pattern very difficult.
Right. Cloud pattern, I mean moving the data to a public cloud and back and so forth.
The latency of sending it to the cloud, massaging it and back.
Then back again. So for example, one thing we worked on was forecasting electricity production from wind and solar farms. And the particular customer requirement at this point was that the model had to run every 6 seconds, and it consumed 30 minutes of historical data across 40 tags. So in this case, there's no way you're going to be able to send that to a cloud and back again. So for that purposes, with the way we built up this local piece of software, so you can run any type of, it's basically Docker containers, right? If you want to get it really into the technology here, but
go further.
Yeah, because so basically what it allows you to do is our data scientists can train a model in the office now they're at home, back to the office, and then push it down to the edge. Technically, the edge is phoning home and seeing in the registry if there's something to do, and then it kind of downloads a model if the connectivity.
So you have CI/CD on the edge as well, so it's automatically being deployed.
You could call it CI/CD. Yeah, so there's a cloud edge manager where you upload and register the Docker container. It checks that you're compliant with API for data capture, and then it registers it for download, and then when the edge is in a decent satellite connectivity, it will then pull the image down and install it.
Awesome. Sounds awesome.
The reason we have that is, of course, number one, not everybody has a cloud, right? Number two, in some instances, the satellite or the lack of communication will disallow you to rely on the cloud, but also for model performance reasons.
Yeah, and data communication purposes or limited bandwidth, somewhat not
exactly,
and latency purposes.
Because it also allows you to compress the data. And time series data are interesting in the sense that very often there are many types of tags which are status tags. Right, so if uncompressed, it's going to be 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and then 1. That's it, and you can decide whether that's going to be 100 megabytes or 10 bytes. Right? Not 10 bytes, but 1 kilobyte.
But you can
right?
deconstruct the unstructured sort of the full time series, and then how can I solve it so I only need the pieces and we still understand what it is?
Lossless compression. Yeah.
Lossless compression.
Yeah. So that's that part.
And you have also the hardware that you produce, or do you have off-the-shelf kind of hardware, and you provide the software mainly, or
we purely provide and are responsible for the software. But we have of course preferred hardware that we recommend our customers to use.
But did you have to sort of assemble your edge gizmo, your software, and you bought from some other, so you have something that is rugged and can live out there. Did you have to source that together, sort of thing, or
the hardware part?
Yeah.
No, I mean we didn't, and there are plenty of gateways out there for industrial use.
And those gateways have now the ability to have Docker containers on them?
No, that part we provide.
Okay.
So
not in the gate. You need to. So there's something you need to put on the edge to have the Docker container, or you don't need to have a Docker container at the edge.
Well, we basically provide the whole operating environment, right? So so we basically take a silly box, and the only thing we require is that there is an operating system on it, and we prefer Ubuntu. But if you run Windows, fine. We even have Macintosh version, but only the salespeople and I use that.
Mac on the edge.
Yeah,
Mac on the edge.
Mac on the edge. Yeah.
That's a new T-shirt.
That I will never wear.
So I would never recommend anybody to use a
Mac on the edge,
a MacBook Pro for ingesting the data at the edge, but it's good for sales purposes and demonstrations. But then in that Ubuntu environment, the Edge Agent software runs the orchestrates the containers for you.
Yep.
Right. So
that is microcates or something, or do you have some kind of Kubernetes orchestration software as well, like microcates or something? Or?
So on the edge itself, I would hesitate to actually go into, but so in the cloud we use Kubernetes classes for it, definitely. Yeah. On the edge, I would not want. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. But super interesting. And then you have the software, and it continuously.
So this is the ingester. We only touched the ingester yet.
Yeah, we're far.
We haven't even started. This is fun.
We haven't even started yet. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Can you give some, just to make it really concrete? It's easy to speak, in a high-level sense. But if you just take some examples, like the crane, and just continue that discussion, how can you provide software that do some kind of analytics and insights, and that they actually have some use for in the crane?
Yeah. So if we leave the tech pattern and kind of we're navigating a bit back up to the problem here. So what we do in all situations, and we can use cranes as an example, right? But I'll generalize it, so the people I'm talking about won't be offended by me not being fully correct. No, but the way it works is that we work together with, in this case, the subject matter experts on the particular crane in question, and they will know what is likely or unlikely to happen to a crane. Yeah. And this is an importance that we do not do like deep learning things. I mean, with telemetric data, the thing is, the types of failures we're talking about hardly ever happen, which is the beauty of this type of equipment, but it's a nightmare for data scientists. So what it means is that we rely very much on rule-based type of analytics, or symbolic analytics, if you want to use that word.
I think rule-based is better, but yeah.
I prefer it. You cannot assess what it is. So we work with the SMEs to encode their knowledge, basically, to say, okay, what are the operating modes we should be looking for? And then we back into the data, and we try to see if those modes are visible by applying different types of statistical techniques. And then we go back and say, okay, is this trend here consistent with what you would expect it to be, looking at historical data? And then we iterate quite fast. So on cranes, we would have typically something around between 4,100 tags running at 1 hertz. And then there are between 2 and 250 models running. Most of them are rather simple rule-based algorithms, if you will, or even just equations. But a few of them are more into the space of machine learning, anomaly detection almost most of the time. So they're looking for anomalies, and when they occur, they light up another flag that then the crane operator can react to and say, okay, something's going on, and there are then different levels of alarm. So we introduced the notion of a predictive alarm. So that is not something that has happened; it's something that might happen. You can click on that and see which sensors contributed to the virtual sensor, the anomaly output, flying, which were the most contributing sensors, and then you can make a judgment call as an expert to say, well, I think the seal here is drying up, so I'm going to go and take a look at that. And what our applications also provide is then the workflow, and I think this is something that it goes back to ACT, right? We want to make sure that people can act on the data, and one way of doing that is providing a workflow that takes you very quickly from the information to what do I do now. And there are many, we can get back to that later. I think there are too many. Why do I say too many? I think there are many data science endeavors which kind of forget what is the action that we're intending someone to do at the basis of this insight.
Stopping at insight.
Yeah, you stop at the insight.
The information even.
Even information sometimes. And I have so many examples of how that can play out. But in this particular case, what we've done is that we've said, when there is an event that has been triggered by a virtual sensor, we call them virtual sensors, the model outputs, there should be a bit of a prescription that says, number one,
recommender.
Check if the sensor is okay. Step number one. And if the sensor is okay, then it goes back to the O&M team. Sensor is okay. We've tested with the heat gun, so there is something off here. Okay, so I go out and investigate. Next step, and then even integrating that with designs and excerpts of PDF drawings of the actual equipment. What this allows you to do is not only kind of enjoy, let's say, the ability to act on predictive events, but it also allows you to start codifying knowledge that is tacit. So it's a knowledge that you over 20 years as responsible for running, this pressure pump.
You can put domain knowledge into the algorithm.
All of a sudden you have a product-led way of harmonizing operational practices, right? So you're kind of using the product as a vehicle for harmonizing operations across. So if you have several fleets of equipment that are very similar, we've said we want to be able to scale very quickly a model across those. So we have the notion of central models, and then we have model instances, and there's versioning, and there's a CI/CD related to that. So you can scale quickly. The other notion is...
What's the difference between a central model and an instance model?
Every piece of equipment has some external factors that are more likely than not to be unique to it. It can be things like temperature, it can be things like even how the operator at hand is operating it, right? Not every crane operator has maybe the same gentle hands, right? Yeah. So the component, even though the model has been trained on a specific type of a component, there's going to be some differences maybe in the data, maybe the control system is a little bit different. So we tune the model.
You fine-tune the model based on a central pre-trained model.
Exactly. So even if it's one model in our central repository, it is then instantiated with some specific parameterization for each and every subcomponent that it's listening to.
Yeah.
Because to be in the actual real context of where it's operating.
And this is why, exactly. So coming back, we're then able to take the let's call it the real-time insight of what's going on with my equipment, get predictive insights on that, but then we can also integrate, of course, the maintenance and failure logs, so you can see what has actually gone on, and is there a pattern of this failure typically happening after someone has done this to the equipment, and then also on top of that, codifying these are the typical steps you would take if you get this type of anomaly. So we're trying to get the actions as close to the data as possible.
So is it mainly insights that you're providing, or are you actually connecting that to some action that it takes in some autonomous way? Or
this is a great debate. So we have said for the longest time that no, we are a software company. We do not want necessarily to be held liable for writing instructions back into a refinery.
Yes, I can imagine that.
Yeah. Having said that, though, there are some gray areas here where where we're being asked by customers, but can't you just write this thing back here? This information, because that would really simplify our lives and automate the step for us. So we're constantly reevaluating this position.
Tough decision, I can imagine, especially if you're liable for what's happening then.
But we had Henrik Landgren on the show here.
Oh, ex-colleague of mine.
Yes,
really?
Of course. And of course, he was at Equity Ventures, and he worked on the Mother Brain project. You know the Mother Brain project?
Not in detail, but I know
you know
it.
of it, right? So here we are now working with AIAW Analytics to support people working in the venture capitalist space to identify the best opportunities, so to speak. And one of the things that he said, I think in a very eloquent way, that I fully agree with, is that one of the harder things with data and AI, in order to really drive another topic you mentioned, adoption. If we really understand this from the adoption metric versus we are successful with technology, there is clearly this whole topic of familiarity. And if you have someone working with in this working environment day by day, for me to get him to sort of go over here and look in a BI system, it's cool, but will it really change his daily workflow? It will not. So his core argument was that with Mother Brain to succeed, they work more and more and more to really understand how they should take the data into a natural flow of whatever you're doing. And I think this goes hand in hand with your insight on it.
I love it. That's exactly right. And I think you even mentioned in the brief here that it is, we try to apply, I'm not a big fan of using frameworks, I don't know in detail, but design thinking. And for us, what it means is that we try to understand what is the day in the life of the technician that is running this piece of equipment. What does that look like, right? And one of my most, I think, exciting and memorable experience I ever had at Arundo is walking around the plants with the people that know the plants, right? And we would be at the shipyard, for example, and he said, well, here you have 4 turbines, they run blasting on these metal sheets, and that turbine over there is bothering me. Okay, well, how is it bothering you? Well, it starts getting hot and then it starts vibrating, and I can't really see that because it only collects these and these measures. I'm like, okay, taking note of that. We can do that, right? On to the next one. Here's a crane that lifts the plate from this station to that station. That gearbox gets really warm sometimes. I don't know why. Okay, let's start getting some data on that. And it's lovely, right? Because you can see he has some real day-to-day problems that, you can hear the nature of these problems. You can put sensors on these things, right? And probably they are sensorized already. But you can start relieving some of these things, right? But
there are a couple of angles that to me is profound if you really want to be true about getting value out of data and AI. So the first one is the core, the first T-shirt. You need to get the AI working with the human in the normal circumstances. If you have to bring the person out of his workflow to look at BI, I think it's the whole idea that we go into a separate BI tool in different systems is to some degree flawed, right?
And this is where I might say something that's going to anger some of my colleagues out there. I think that is great with the visionary presentations where you gather the executive management team and you offer them the VR headsets. And they can experience something really cool, the digital twin of a factory. They can turn around, walk around in it, and you can get robotic dogs to walk around on your boat and everything. I think it's lovely. It's a lovely way of inspiring, I think, and sometimes that's really useful. So I'm not going to say it's not useful. But I have yet to meet a person on a site that wants another screen to look at. Yeah. Never mind putting glasses on, right? So you have to be very humble to the fact that if you don't get the adoption from the people,
exactly,
it doesn't matter. And another thing is that as our data science team that we have are they're data scientists, of course, but they're also really, really good Python programmers. Yeah. And they are as obsessed, if not more obsessed, as the rest of us are in the organization for solving a problem. And maybe sometimes it isn't the most exciting data science. Maybe it isn't. But they get to work with SMEs and see the eyes open up. Yeah. When, I haven't seen this before. Really? You can visualize it like that? Yeah, you can visualize it. Wow. Can you build an app for that? So,
but this is, so you said it before, when we're talking about some of the key learnings from what are we underestimating? We mentioned incentives, and then you have this whole thing about, I think it's very important around understanding change. So even if we can innovate really fast and go crazy, as long as we have humans as part of the to get value out of this in the loop, the adoption and the dimension of comfort and understanding how you link back to their environment becomes to understand that on a very, very deep level. I mean, like, let's talk about AI augmented UX or whatever. That piece of the puzzle becomes really, really important.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And that's why I keep coming back to the thing about familiarity. Because even though we build analytics software, what we really love seeing is someone doing something a bit different tomorrow because they learned something that the software provided. And the software, sometimes we don't even need a UI. It's just an alert, right?
And I think it's core to some other topic that we have been speaking about a lot, which is the catch-22 problem, which basically means that we have domain experts that don't know anything about data or data-driven businesses.
Yep.
But they know the business extremely well. And then you have data scientists or people that know how to work with data and algorithms, but they don't know anything about the domain.
Yeah.
If you just let the data scientists drive the work, you will lose all the domain knowledge, and they don't even will know, what they should do. And vice versa, if you just let the domain experts drive the work, they will not even, come up with ideas that is possible to do with a data-driven approach. So you have to kind of fix this catch-22, and I think what you said, just walking around in the plant with the domain expert is really how to come up with the innovative ideas that solves this catch-22 problem, right?
It's a part of the answer, because what they will feel is that we are empathizing with them. And so we're joining them. We're not trying to convince them that we know this equipment better.
Right.
That is a catch-22. Sometimes in order to get business, you may need to convince someone that, yes, we know this type of equipment, but we need to do that being a bit, eloquently articulate, let's say, about what we mean by that, right? Well, but also specifically, we know this equipment in the sense that we've built data models for it before.
Right.
It doesn't mean that we know, we can never beat a pump manufacturer on how to run pumps. We can never beat someone that's worked with his or her pumps
elevators
for 20 years. Yeah, there's no way that we can know that better. What we can do is support, augment that knowledge with data in a way that often they haven't seen before. But in order to be invited for that dance, we often have to do a little bit of that. We need a little bit. Okay, we make a small investment. If you agree to spend a few hours with us, and then if you're still not convinced, fine, right? But in order to break this catch-22, you need to offer something, and often it is to spend some time. And one of the traits that are so important for the people that in a company like Arundo is to be genuinely curious about the problem that the customer has. Yeah. So that they kind of automatically get into this. I want to read a paper on this chemical process now because this was so exciting. Not to become an expert, but to be able to have an even stronger rapport next time I speak to this customer. Yeah.
And I wasn't really sure about the type of customers you have. You spoke about the governmental sector and also traditional industry. What's the type of customers that you work with?
So in Arundo, it's only customers that run heavy critical assets. And ideally, so technically speaking, it is equipment that is undergoing wear and tear, and where stops or unplanned maintenance events are highly costly, either due to the actual maintenance event being costly, but typically because of the production loss being costly. Those are the customers we serve. And
so energy is a good one. Steelworks,
energy,
mines.
steelworks, chemical processing, equipment, heavy duty equipment like cargo handling equipment. Those are the types of customers we're working with.
But you did work a lot with the government sector before, at least.
Yes, I did, yeah.
And can you just describe perhaps the main differences between working with more of an industrial sector and a government sector? Yeah,
so there are a few things in common, I would say, and this is also, probably might get shot afterwards for some of the things I might offer here, but that's okay. There are a few things in common, which is the focus on this has to be resilient, it has to be stable, we don't introduce change lightly, because it has to work, right? We're serving. So maybe you could say civil servants may have this greater good mindset. In heavy industrials, it is safety, right? So they have that in common, which makes it slow to change, right? For good and bad, there are good reasons for that. But then there are some things that are very different then, right? So the the stakeholder landscape and the way governance and financing work in the public sector is, of course, very, very different, right? So even though everybody agrees it's a great idea, doesn't mean that it necessarily will happen in the government sector. Depending on which country you are, ultimately it might be politically driven. I think in Scandinavia, you are, maybe a bit more likely to end up with an answer to the question which is less politically driven because of the way we set up the system. But you do have the strive for earning the right to govern the country in the next elections. That underpins a lot of how decisions are made, and I think that's the way it should be, right? But that's different, of course. Heavy asset industries, they have heavy assets. They are expensive. It's ROI at the end of the day.
ROI, yeah.
Safety and ROI.
Yeah, so interesting.
I have one question that I would like to explore a little bit. How do Arundo define product? And because you said a little bit like you were highlighting how you've been on some sort of startup pivot journey, right? Go from here to platform. Now we do products.
Yes.
What do you mean with product, or how do you define product in this sense, and what's the pivot that happened?
So the pivot that happened for us was if we leave the early POC days aside, then we spent a good 2 years, I think, building up what we would call a platform. And what I mean by platform is that it wouldn't solve a problem for the operational responsible customers. It would allow their data scientists and their engineers to wire data up and deploy their own models and then consume the results. So it's very much an analytics platform type of thinking. That's still a product. So I get your point. It's still a product. And you get stuck in your own terminology, right? What we're doing now is saying we have those components now, but what we found is that the customers we have don't necessarily have that data science team or that willingness or ability or competency to build that application. So we said, okay, then we do that. So now we build the application that actually tends to solve the problem. That's what we call the product.
But now here's then, how do you understand that then? Because in one way you can have sort of use cases on the shelf, but it almost sounds like you kind of need to build like the product solution for each use case or each installation. Or what's the difference between now? Is this a product, or is this a product with a lot of tailoring or something like that? How would you define? Do you see what I'm after?
Absolutely, and this is what I would say is that defining these boundaries is a bit of a constant conversation, and I would say that's fine, right? But we have two distinct offerings, which very much builds on what you're saying. So equipment-centric analytics. For equipment-centric analytics, so let's say you're running a plant, and you have the same type of plant on 5, 6, 7 different sites, and you know that there are 4 or 5 really critical equipment systems on each site. Then the equipment-centric analytics is the way to go. And that application is quite opinionated. So the only configuration that happens there is making sure that the models are tuned against the specific equipment in question, and further models might be developed. So that is really a configuration. We will call that a configuration service that goes into installing the product and validating the model frameworks, the model instances. So that's one world. The other world is if you're in the more complex processing industries where there are many, many different small and big pieces of components necessary in order for you to run, for example, a chemical process all the way through. In that case, we have a number of technology components which allow you to deploy complex data structures. So we have one case now where we're developing a set of environmental use cases inside a product. And there are thousands of equations. And these equations, they rely on each other, and they have dependencies on sensors that are different in timestamps and arrive from different systems. We have built IP that allows you to create a graph-based relationship model of all these things, which also contain meta information about the actual sensor, the quality of the sensor, the provenance of the data, etc. That is a piece of IP we call domain and compute IP. It allows you to represent a complex manufacturing setup digitally using the graph, We don't call it the digital twin.
I was going to ask that. Have you gone down that rabbit hole or not?
There are some of my very dear management colleagues and investors that would love if I called it a digital twin, and
exactly.
We might do it, and it is a digital twin if you want, but we don't call it that.
Please don't.
Yeah, we don't call it that. It is a digital graph. It's a directed graph representation of a domain of equipment and processes that hang together. Next to that, there is a compute orchestrator that allows you to traverse the tree, traverse the graph in order to produce a number, and then write that thing back into an application database which feeds the back end, which feeds the front end. So this sort of, you can call it MLOps if you want to, but that's also another word which you can put many different interpretations into. But this is a core technology that we're using for those types of applications where you need to customize. So
I'm trying to get it right, because in one way you have a product set.
Yes.
And you have some core offerings. You call that the equipment centric.
That product is called Marathon. Yeah.
This is Marathon, and then you have now for more process centric problems.
Process Insight. Yeah.
Process Insight. So Marathon and Process Insight. But essentially, you live in a reality of heavy equipment that has a legacy for 50 years, and there's been replacements. So to know which controllers and gateways. They're all different. There's no one single heavy equipment plant that looks exactly the same, even if they should on paper, right?
Yeah.
But they don't.
They don't.
So here, basically, you can then go with a core product offering, but then basically you have to do some sort of onboarding installation, setup, and then ultimately, not only that, if I understand you right, you actually need to tune the use case. So even if you have that, slightly what they want to do, or what's the value, what's the alert they want, could probably vary.
That varies. So if we take the equipment world of Marathon, we need to do, of course, an investigation of which equipments do you really want to worry about. Is it all of them or a few of them? And this is where I'll park that thought and get back to that because it's another rabbit hole. But you need to kind of define the business problem in equipment terms. Right?
What equipment should we have some data insight actionable?
Exactly. And then we create an asset hierarchy out of that information that is fed into our domain model. That is their asset hierarchy. But given that both OPC UA and SCADA systems and there are ISO standards for this, it is starting to standardize. If the standard is there, we can just read it in. But in most cases, there is sort of manual intervention required. You can use some NLP techniques to infer which equipment and sensor belongs to a tag ID, and we do that on occasion. But that is a bit of configuration that needs to happen. But then in the Marathon world, often the first, because the other thing is you can't wait for data science to find the needle in the haystack. That's because what you want to do is scale those kind of day-to-day insights very quickly. So the first set of models, if you will, that we deploy are often simple things like I want to see the pressure at the start and the pressure at the end of the pumping cycle and divide it by the, let's say, a discharge pressure or an RPM or something like that. That's the thing I want to see. And I think I want to have an alert when it goes above a certain level or if it stays above a certain level more than 5 minutes. And that is really fast that we do like this. And then you can scale that across. That's where it starts, which means that within 2 or 3 weeks, if the data connectivity issue is resolved, which is another customer-specific thing, right? You can get into that if you want to. You will be able to start consuming this data and see some benefits from it. And then over time, at the, depending on how relevant it is, and often it is quite relevant, you can go into looking for more advanced techniques to find not the needle in the haystack, but patterns that might be indicative of things that you're worrying about.
But it's interesting because the product thinking also refers to the way I understand it now, that in order to meet the maturity and the organizational sort of, from data to data engineering to machine learning, they want to be their core domain. So they want to consume the insight basically as a domain expert. And for you, it becomes a product thinking, even if it's a tailored or customized product, it's the way you sell. You sell on the outcome and the action rather than selling on, here you have a bunch of tech that you can do something cool stuff with. Good luck with that.
Yeah, no, that's what we're trying to do. And we've made it deliberately difficult for ourselves in that sense. No, I mean that kind of seriously, because it is a kind of difficult sell to say that we're going to build software that is statistically likely to solve a problem. But it is the most fun thing to do, I have to say, and it's a terrific challenge.
And why did you go in this direction? Is it simply because to meet the maturity of the customer, to have a product market fit?
That yes, more and more. So in a sense, you could say that to Jakob, the founder, he had this vision already in 2015 that is where he wanted to go. But then how to get there has evolved from POCs to platform to product or to application, if you will. But we've always had the same vision. It's always been the same vision. But how to get there has evolved a bit. And yes, now we've figured out that if we really want to take on that mission of providing actionable insight, right, it has to be a certain element of customization, if you will. Not necessarily like UI-wise, not necessarily, right? But the way the algorithms and calculations are set up, that has to be custom. But that's fine. That's also why I said Marathon is an example of a product which is feature complete from a UI point of view and from a backend point of view. Now it's about continuing to automate the way we onboard and scale.
Yeah, because I can imagine that you now better and better understand the problem, and there will always be a data and configuration problem here that is unique for each plant. However, we can automate the way the machine understands what it all is and sort it all out.
Yes.
So we need to customize this, but we can have the product do it for us rather than we hardwire that.
And the 5th time you do that customization, you take a little bit of overhead out. The 6th time you realize that this we can actually automate. The 7th time, So it comes back to this we talked about earlier, which is having two thoughts at the same time, which is, yes, now we have delivery personnel, customer success personnel that is working with the customers to help out with this configuration. But every time we do that in the retro, they're like, hey, this particular thing here, I could see that pattern in the Excel files. So maybe next time, is there a way to? Yeah, of course. Somebody raised. Yeah, I can do a parser for that.
I can do a parser.
Parser that, no problem, right? So then that becomes an experimental feature, and then over time it gets onto the roadmap.
Cool. The time is flying away, and I'm trying to prioritize a bit the different topics here, and I was planning to ask a bit about leadership. What's the way to actually provide great leadership and build teams, recruitment, how to find talents, getting funding as you have as well in Arundo. I think I skip all that, and
I love that.
And perhaps go a bit more into more philosophical, societal kind of long-term topics.
Okay.
And I'm actually eager because you mentioned cybersecurity a number of times, and I think not speaking specifically about Arundo, but more in general about the society we have today, and also that we are currently, not we in Sweden, but some parts of Europe is at war currently. What is your thought about cybersecurity? How can companies defend against this? Do you have any thoughts about that in general?
I have some general thoughts. This is not an area that I'm particularly expertise in. I have any particular expertise in. But one observation I do make is there is still some organizations out there that think that they're going to prevent this.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the case. I think this is one of those things that it's not a matter of whether. I think the mindset we have to have is not whether you're going to be hacked, it is when.
Yes.
So I think the investment needs to move towards how do we minimize the impact of when we are hacked, and how do we then restore operations after we've been hacked. And I think there are two, and then I think the next problem is, even if you take that leap, is minimizing the impact. That doesn't necessarily only mean being able to shut something down quickly, right? It could also mean just having less sensitive things. And that is something that sometimes is undervalued, I think. So just being a bit sort of careful about how much do I need to have stored in places that are not air-gapped in order to run my operations. And I think that sometimes, I can see that, I'm not speaking for Arundo specifically, but I think we're all sometimes a little bit sort of careless, and there's I made Google Slides presentation with something, and I'm in a bit of a hurry, I'm just going to kind of PDF it, send it somewhere, and I think there is a certain amount of prudency that we're not there yet. Some industries are way there. some industries are very much
Which
there.
one would you say is leading? I mean, we know some that is not saying Coop specifically, but perhaps one of their suppliers or colleagues Kommun or some governmental agencies there. Who do you say is rather well prepared?
Well, I think that there are some industries that have had a culture of safety going way back, and I think the heavy industrials are one of those.
Okay, interesting.
So one thing that I learned when I started working with industrial companies is cultural elements like safety moments. So every meeting will start with a safety moment, which is 5 minutes of somebody telling a story of an anecdote of something that happened and how safety culture was important, or reciting part of the value statement of the company related to safety. So safety is just in the culture. I mean, even something that I'd never seen at a bank or telecom company is a clear instruction saying that if you're walking the stairs, always put the hand on the rail. And these are things. So it's in the culture to take care of yourself and be
safety become like you.
Exactly. You're not allowed to park your car front first. You have to back your car into the parking spot so you can leave fast. These are things that are ingrained in some of these industries, and I think that was fascinating to me to see.
So it can be an effect of, I mean, some heavy industry companies have the physical safety in mind and the safety of people physically, so to say, which is an important part, and that can spill over to a more digital and cyber security aspect as well, just because they have the mindset of safety.
But of course, that doesn't eradicate the competence gap, which is, what is your ability to track the type of competence you need to, work effectively with cybersecurity, like minimizing surface. Sort of attack surface, thinking about technical ways of restoring after something has gone down, etc. Having constant pen tests being done. All this. I mean, there's a competency gap, of course, and some industries are able to pay more, frankly speaking, for the and have been, and they have, let's say, more of a reputation risk, maybe sometimes.
If I ask a more general question, then. Perhaps not for Sweden, but for other countries in Europe or in the world, are you afraid that cyber attacks can be a danger to society in some worlds because they attack like energy companies or infrastructure companies or similar type of critical infrastructure that you have in the country?
It's not the topic I've been thinking too much about, so I don't think I will share anything insightful apart from maybe the obvious that I think there's much more of a, let's call it, I don't want to call it a war now, but there's much more tension going on here than we think and what is reported. I think we see a small tip of an iceberg that is continuously ongoing here, and I wouldn't be surprised if a fair share of future we've already seen it, right? But a fair share of future conflicts are initiated and ended. In
cyberspace.
Cyberspace, yeah. But now I'm really speculating. It's not something I've been thinking very much about.
Who has? I think it's a lot of people that should.
But there's also now this whole competence gap is quite interesting, right? Because I worked with Vattenfall for many years, and I fully concur with you with that within the heavy asset industry, and even if you have the NSI type classed information. So I've been around people that run critical networks and nuclear power plants. They are good. They are, and the safety culture, the way you said it with the handrail. I know who I can think about Uwe, right? And it's there. It's a culture, right? And it spills over to IT security and all that. All good. What I found now is a little bit like. The competence gap now is that we are starting to use slightly different types of technologies when we're using the cloud, especially. And basically, I would argue to some degrees, cloud can be more safe. But what you need to protect, how you do it, how you work it, so to speak, is different. So basically, we have the problem now that we have maybe even very good, rigorous approaches, but they're kind of set up for a different technology stack, where you can do, you do the onion, you do the security in one way, and now you need to really rethink it. So here it's this trick that how we do it, we have been good at it, but there is now a competency gap, how it needs to be rethought to some degree, is my argument.
I think you're right, and what I have observed myself is one of the, I don't think this is a big issue or not, but I've clearly observed that the use of open source components and generous use and often rather unmanaged use of huge trees of dependencies in building out your apps. Using tools like Snyk, etc., you can get somewhere, right? But I think I don't say that I necessarily agree with this because I haven't thought through it enough. But somebody said, hey, if you find an open source package you love, rip out the pieces you really need and just write them yourself.
Interesting.
Which is
this is actually interesting because you actually
I don't think I agree with it, but it was and it was based on this sort of how do you manage these how do you keep control of the whole, because every time you add something, you tend, if you look at the type of attacks that are going on, like this sort of vulnerabilities that are instant. It's very often related to some zero day, right? They very often relate to some little package somewhere that wasn't patched fast enough, right? And
I mean, that also ties back, I think, a bit to what you mentioned in the beginning. You're getting a bit back into coding yourself, right? Or?
Yeah, I am.
What's up with that? What are you doing then?
No, I when I started at Arundo, I hadn't written a line of code since '99, I think, 1998, and I kind of thought somewhat arrogantly that, well, I know. I used to do coding like professionally back in the 90s, and I should be able to at least follow the language. Boy, was I wrong! I just realized that there's so much has happened, and in my old days, you would basically start from a clean sheet and just C++ your way forward, right? And now it's like no, it's like this. We have these packages, CI/CD and DevOps and the infrastructure and cloud, and I had no idea what was going on. So I just decided, okay. I'm gonna learn how to build web apps, and then I just went from there.
And what kind of technology or frameworks did you start playing around with to build web apps?
Well, so I sat down with my son. He's 14 now. So I sat down with my son in our summer house, and he had his laptop, I had my laptop. And said, let's just build an app together. And we just find a YouTube video randomly of somebody building a weather app in React. Yeah. And the last time I touched JavaScript was kind of frustratingly, I just needed a button to work. So for me, JavaScript was the thing you had to go into, and the HTML didn't do it for you. And now all of a sudden, people were building backends in this stuff. Are you kidding me?
I mean, that's cool, right? But it takes some time to just get into React and learn how that works.
Well, I didn't know what I was doing, right? But so then I backed my way back out, and so I learned. I started experimenting with JavaScript, went into TypeScript very quickly because our engineers were using TypeScript, and I realized, okay, now I'm a bit on more familiar grounds because JavaScript just felt a little bit too wild west for me. But typed, great. Now I can breathe again, right? And then I just started experimenting from there on, and trying to learn. I don't build useful apps. I just build apps for learning. So I do it the hard way every time.
It's a hobby. This is like a hobby, like a way to. And I like it. Are you experimenting with your son? Is he following in this, or did his interest die?
Well, his interest is it's up and down. So sometimes he will look over my shoulder when I do something, and then he will ask, "What are you building now?" I don't know, explain it. He's like, "Okay." So it's up and down. 14 years old. Other things are more interesting, like gaming.
Do you think it's getting easier to start coding things, or is it getting more advanced? I mean, we have been speaking, for example, that to build an AI system, we need more and more specialized skills potentially. I could also argue that that's not the right direction going forward and may not be so. But you can see at least today that we have more and more roles to build up a team with to be able to build some application. What would you say about the coming 5 years? Do you think it will be easier to build a weather web app than it is today, or harder?
Given this new hobby of mine, I've been trying to stay as aware as I can of trends that are going on. I, of course, not succeeding because I don't have time. But one thing that I've looked at, and I'm not convinced of yet, is kind of the no-code movement. So I started experimenting with one or two of those frameworks, and it left me thinking, well, that's kind of a prototype, just taken a little bit further. The other thing I was very interested in is things like what Tab9 is doing when they're using GPT in the cloud in order to predict the code you're writing.
Right. Tab 9?
Tab 9.
Okay.
If you don't have Tab 9 installed in VS Code, you're doing something wrong, man. So basically, you start writing like something.
So it's the Copilot thing with
the Copilot thing, exactly what it is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, so I see these two trends, right? So you have no code, and then something that starts trying to write the code for you, trying to kind of predict what you're going to do next. This makes you very fast. Yeah. Now, I'm an engineer, so my next thing is going to be very biased. I love the Copilot, but I'm not. The no-code movement. It's not clear to me how opinionated that will be with respect to the distance from that to something you want to take to production properly. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
your argument is that no code might be good for rapid prototyping, but could it really be performant and robust?
I don't know
ever?
yet. Yeah,
they would sell it like this. You can build your robust production system on it, but really rapid prototyping, maybe. But that's your core question, right?
And it is a question. I'm genuinely unsure. I don't know. But I think But to your question, I think it's going to be faster. I think
faster. But not easier.
I think the learning curve to go from I have no idea what code is to hey, I have a weather app. I think that's going to be shorter and shorter. But what I also have experienced myself, going from the weather app to now, one of the things I have a market sentiment analyzer that scrapes headlines. So that's 5 microservices working in orchestration. And I just realized, okay, boy, going from that, it looks simple, but the underlying complexity of kind of thinking through all the different infrastructure elements that need to work together in order for that thing to actually function properly, and all the problems that can occur in between, I'm not sure that is getting any easier. Right. There are a lot of great automation things out there, like I think what Heroku is doing is cool, what Netlify is doing is cool. Yeah. If you have Firebase, you have these things coming out, that's cool, that's moving in that direction. But where is the line? Where do you draw the line where this becomes so opinionated that you're stuck?
Flexibility goes down potentially.
Yeah, which goes to your point, having a culture of it's okay to throw it out. And I think a good engineer, software engineer, is less married to the technology and the language used, and more adaptable to saying, okay, well, if I can't do this in JavaScript, I may have to brush up my Python for this one, and I think that's cool.
I think I see that with the people I work with that I admire, which is really deep in data processing, big data. We have mutual friends that they are more hardcore into the fundamental software engineering or data engineering practice, and they know how to understand the real technical problem. And then they have their favorite. They tend to find more use of GCP or these Airflow here because I like it. But they're not in love with it. They're marrying the tech to the data problem at hand. And I think that is one difference that I see sometimes to a more the enterprise way, where sort of you drive enterprise guardrails in a very unhealthy way, right? Yeah. And you're trying to push on, we should do everything the same way. Well, what's the data problem you're solving? And the real engineers, they love the engineering bits, and they know that, and they are comfortable to switch this one is not really good to solve in Julia or in Python or whatever it is. So
exactly. And there's another thing that I found, which is there is always a bit of religion going on between
a bit,
right? Or you go native cloud, or you're going to stick to kind of Docker Kubernetes world, or are you going to is .NET the thing, or are you going to do Node, so but I think at the end of the day, if you're a smallish company, it's not about the language, it's about the ability to have flexibility in your resourcing, right? So it's not having different languages only really becomes a problem if you only have people that know those languages, because then you're not able to get the maximum leverage out of the engineers you have.
What's the main language where most of your product is written in?
Oh, it's Node.js, TypeScript. And then we have a bit of .NET going on as well. Data scientists, they all do everything in Python, of course.
Yeah, so you have your Python world, and then you have a TypeScript world.
But the Python world and TypeScript world, it all ends up in the containers.
And then all in containers, right?
Yeah.
And then Docker's Kubernetes 50-50, or in the end more Kubernetes?
Well, the images are Docker images, and they're orchestrated by in Kubernetes clusters.
Yeah.
So going back to the original question a bit, if we were to be a bit optimistic and hope for the best, do you believe in a world where AI can help not only in actually having intelligent products, but actually having, making human engineers more intelligent by using Copilot to generate code, to find bugs, to prevent, security vulnerabilities, and in that way still allow programming to be done faster and more safe, potentially?
Yeah, not only, I am a techno optimist for sure. Yeah. And I would even argue that there is empirical evidence to support that view. I mean, going all the way back to, Malthus and the Malthusian theory of that, we're going to overconsume the Earth's resources. And how did we curb that? By technological, innovation and by productivity improvements through technology innovation. We have sort of innovated ourselves out of one problem after the other. And I'm naive optimist that that's going to continue, right? I really am. Having said that, I think that when we talk about AI is not a thing, right? It's so many different things. And
on different levels.
And on very different levels. So I think that AI as an umbrella concept for finding ways of helping us or automating tasks, very positive, very positive. I just think we need to realize that there are certain things that certain approaches are really good at, and they really suck at others, right?
Good, well said. On that positive end note, I think we should try to close up a bit and perhaps go to the standard closing questions. What's up in your life coming days, months, perhaps privately, professionally, anything specific planned?
Well, next week is sportlov.
Yes.
Winter break. So we're going to spend some time on Dalarö Gård with the family and just hang out. That's nice. Take a few days off. I am keen to get back to cleaning up some problems I have with my news market sentiment app.
Yeah.
Can't wait. I got some great feedback from friends. I can't wait to get into that backlog.
Should get into some BERT model as well, I think.
If you can recommend a good model for Swedish sentiment assessments, let's talk.
Go to Hugging Face and the KB, Kungliga Bibliotekets repository there for some. They have an Alberta model that's really good in Swedish as well.
Great, I'm going to look into that. Thank you. Then apart from that, I think it's maybe I'll venture into studying some new piece on the piano. Let's see. But the bigger plan for this year is to maybe start the sauna construction project at the summer house.
Ooh, that's the big one.
That's the big one. Yeah. Well, it's a small one, but it's a big one.
Sounds perfect. Anyone that you would recommend to have on this podcast? Someone that you would like to listen and learn from?
Oh, wow. Have you had... Oh, I should have thought about this question before we went in there. But I was thinking that there are a few people that I really enjoyed working with during the time I was sort of a consultant within the public sector digital space. I don't know if you've had them on the podcast. But I'm thinking about Åsa Zetterberg, Per Mosseby, Ann Helenius.
Åsa Zetterberg is a great name. We should certainly get her, I think.
Yeah, because I would love to hear how they're thinking about their experiences now. So partially hindsight, partially very current, right? Yeah.
Awesome. That sounds
great
perfect.
idea.
With that, I thank you for this awesome time and all the questions we haven't been able to answer. We will continue with them, perhaps in the after work, and even more interesting topics, I think, that we will continue discussion. But thank you very much, Martin Lundqvist.
Thank you very much for having me.
Awesome, Martin. Thank you.